Hello, and welcome back to Seek Truth Here, the Reason Why podcast. I'm Dana, I'm your host, and this is where we break down why Christians believe what they believe into bite-sized, easy to understand chunks. If Christian apologetics has ever felt overwhelming or confusing to you, or maybe you're just interested, this podcast is for you. Each episode is designed to leave you a little more confident in your faith and a little more prepared to give a reason why. We have been reading through Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Today we're in chapter 5. Progressive is one of those words that gets used a lot right now, but never really defined. It simply means movement towards something better. But in today's society in America, progressivism seems synonymous with open-mindedness and tolerance, and some even use it to confirm their stance against certain long-held values. According to Lewis, real progress comes from realizing when you're wrong and turning around quickly to get nearer to the place where you want to be. He gives the example of a man who takes a little misstep off of a path, maybe at first only off by a small degree. But as he continues, he got further and further away from the path that was actually leading to where he wanted to go, until finally he was way off course. The best thing any of us can do in a situation like that is to backtrack, get back to the place where we first veered off. Modern day progressivism might say that's not progressive. But being truly progressive is being willing to follow the truth wherever it leads, even when that means admitting you had it wrong and then changing direction. That's actually what Lewis is starting to work through with chapter 5 of Mere Christianity, which he calls We Have Cause to Be Uneasy. He's not trying to provoke anyone or drag anyone backward. He's just refusing to stop the argument early. This chapter is uncomfortable in a very specific way, not emotional or dramatic, just honest. Lewis isn't asking, what do we want to be true? He's asking, if we take the evidence seriously, where does it actually lead? Okay, so what are we dealing with? Well, up to this point, Lewis has said two things seem hard to get around. One, the universe exists and is remarkably ordered. Two, we all seem to live as though there's a real standard of right and wrong. So now he asks the obvious next question. If something is behind all this, what is it like? And I really appreciate that Lewis doesn't jump ahead here. He doesn't say, and therefore Christianity. He slows down and says, let's look at the evidence we already have. If you just look at the universe, Lewis says, you might reasonably conclude there's something like a great artist behind it. There's beauty, order, there's intelligence. But, and this is important, it's also completely indifferent to us. Nature doesn't care if you're a good person. Cancer doesn't check your moral record. Earthquakes don't avoid kind people. So if all we had was the universe, we might conclude that whatever is behind reality is powerful and brilliant, but not necessarily kind or fair or gentle. Lewis doesn't try to soften that. He lets it stand. The moral law changes the picture, though, because it doesn't behave like gravity or biology. It doesn't just describe what happens. It tells us what ought to happen. And more than that, it doesn't feel optional. You can ignore it, but it still presses in on you. You can reject it, but you still feel the need to explain yourself when you break it. And Lewis says that tells us something important. If the universe alone suggests power without mercy, the moral law suggests goodness but not softness. Remember that soft soap comment that he made last chapter? There's no indulgence. There's no do whatever feels right, but real goodness. And that's where things get uncomfortable. So let's look at some examples. First, something small and personal. Think about a conflict with someone close to you, a friend, a spouse, maybe a coworker. You snap at them, you're short, you say something you probably shouldn't have, and later, maybe that night, or if you're like me, an overthinker, every day for the rest of your life, you replay it in your head. But notice what you don't say to yourself. You don't say there's no right and wrong, so this doesn't matter. You don't say morality's fake, so who cares? Instead, you start justifying. I was exhausted. They pushed my buttons. That's not really who I am. And sometimes those explanations are fair, but that's not the point. The point is this: you feel the need to explain yourself because you think there's a real standard that you didn't meet. Now, let's zoom out. Think about a large-scale injustice like slavery or genocide. Even people who disagree about almost everything else will say, that wasn't just unpopular or outdated, that was straight wrong. Not inconvenient, not inefficient, wrong. And notice this, we don't talk about those things the way we talk about old-fashioned trends or bad scientific theories. We don't say, well, people just felt differently back then. We say, they should have known better. Lewis's point is that we treat moral failure, both personal and collective, as something that genuinely deserves condemnation. And you don't have to be religious to say this. We only do that if we believe there's a real moral standard that applies across time, culture, and situations. Here's the part Lewis wants us to sit with without rushing past it. If the source of the moral law is real and good and not impressed by our excuses, that's not immediately comforting. At this stage, Lewis is very clear. We are not yet talking about a forgiving God, just a good one. And goodness, when you're in the wrong, isn't automatically reassuring. It's unsettling because of what it implies. An all good being must hate what we do. So chapter 5 leaves us in a strange but honest place. The universe suggests power, but not mercy. The moral law suggests goodness, but not softness. And if that makes us uneasy, Lewis says, maybe that's not a flaw in the argument. Maybe it's a sign we're finally taking reality seriously. But real progress doesn't mean never being uncomfortable. Sometimes it means realizing you need to turn around and get back to where you first got off course so you can follow the truth. Next time, we're going to continue to let these first chapters marinate and take an episode to dig into some concepts that we touched on but maybe didn't get to flesh out enough, and work on some practical application of what we've learned so far. Then in episode 8, we will pick up where Lewis leaves off at the end of this chapter, which is that if this all good being is behind our reality, then Christianity is our only hope. But he's still not going to rush to that conclusion. He's going to examine some rival ideologies first. Thanks for listening to Seek Truth Here, the Reason Why podcast. If today's episode encouraged you, share it with a friend who might find it helpful. You can find more resources and episode notes at my website, seektruthhere.com, and more content on Facebook and Instagram at Seek Truth Here. Remember, every step that you take to understand the truth helps you to give a reason why. The truth is worth knowing and sharing. I'll see you next time. God bless.